fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello everyone, this is Vikram Prakash and you are listening to Architecture Talk. It's Wednesday, July 8th, 2020, and we are still in the midst of this pandemic called COVID-19. And as a part of it, I am bringing you this series on architecture in the time of coronavirus. I hope you're enjoying the discussions we have been having so far, and if you have any thoughts and suggestions about them, I would love to hear from you. Please don't hesitate to get hold of me. You can find all our contact information at architecturetalk.org. Today I have a returning conversation with my friend Dilip da Cunha, and also joining us in this conversation is his partner Anuradha Mathur. Dilip and Anuradha together practice based out of Philadelphia, and they have an amazing and ingenious conception of what landscape architecture, what an ecological view is and rather should be around their concept of wetness, which is a rewriting of what it means to live in relationship to water on planet Earth. Strongly advise if you're interested to listen to my previous conversation with Dilip, and today we continue that conversation but bring it down home to strategies and thoughts around coronavirus, around teaching in these strange times, and in general about what this means for design and architectural and ecological thinking. I love this conversation and I hope you do too. Here we go. Anuradha and Dilip, thank you for agreeing to be on this recording with Architecture Talk.
Pleasure, Vikram. Yeah.
So how are you guys doing? You're at home. Where, in Philadelphia or Boston? How is the quarantine affected you personally? I mean, is the home climbing in on you, or are you too busy with practice and just haven't noticed the quarantine? How are you doing?
Well, we live in Philadelphia.
Yeah.
It's amazing how used to you get to being in your home. And I would have thought before it began that even a week being at home would have been too much. And we are how many months in? And it's so we are very, human beings are very adaptable, I think.
Yeah.
But having said that, I don't take that many walks, but Dilip takes at least 3 or 4 walks per day. And with his mask in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I think in that sense, one does not get claustrophobic.
Yeah.
But you're taking walks, Anuradha. So how are you adapting? You're happy going out into the garden and back in, and that's enough?
No, it's not enough. It's not enough.
No, I certainly think that one has to get used to, let's say, other mediums by which one is interacting with the world. And sometimes I tell you, it's not all that not appropriate, but let's say it's a learning experience in this regard, that you now have to, you take in things through the news, through the telephone, through interacting with like this kind of interaction.
Zoom, yeah.
And you realize, and points like this, and this is true even when we are giving crits actually in design studio, you realize how much we communicate with much more than the mouth, and much more than the face. I mean, we communicate with, with our hands, we communicate with our feet. I think we communicate with in conversation with others around. That is, I would say, not acknowledged very often. But I'm pretty certain that when someone just nods the head through the corner of, and you see it through the corner of your eye, it sort of impacts what you say, and you acknowledge it. So you're not speaking in this mode. So you realize what you're missing.
Yeah, you do.
I think in a situation like this, and so it's very, very revealing, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, the body language and sort of imperceptible secondary level communications and picking ups to
Exactly.
invent a bird is all true, particularly in the design situation. I mean, I feel like teaching studio, etc. You are saying one thing, but through the body language, you're conveying other things also. And I know all that is true. So we miss that, but so the losses are, unquestionable. But what I'm trying to get at is, uh, I mean, what are we learning? What are we learning? What are you learning regarding your own understandings of uh, your interpretations of the world, whether it's your concepts of landscape ecology, wetness, by the these ideas. And by the way, I have been like marketing your wetness concept everywhere, man, right, left, and center. And I do a perfunctory reference to your book in the beginning, and then I talk about it as if it's my bright idea. It's just so powerful, so powerful, so wonderful. Thank you for it.
It's a pleasure to hear that, Vikram. It's a pleasure to hear that. No, but I think it's a very good question, because one of the things that we are often sort of at pains to try and communicate to people is that we pay a lot of attention to materiality and the role that the material realm plays in our imagination. But having said that, I mean, I want to distinguish it from other folks who speak of material imagination and, in bachelors and all that, in the sense that we're not talking about material as, as in something, like substance. We're talking about a kind of immanence and being embedded within, and that appreciation actually of the ubiquity of something makes you think differently, gives you a different sort of imaginative ground, as it were. So it is the combination of wetness as ubiquitous, but also wetness as all-consuming, in the sense of it being the driving, I should say, medium of communication.
So wetness is everywhere, and wetness is a general condition of being. I mean, if I was a quantum physicist or particle physicist, which, as you know well, I am nothing like that, they would say, well, it's all subatomic particles doing their stuff everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, there is good synergy between what they would say and what you are arguing. So what I'm trying to get at is, and now we have this virus, running around in this wetness, and it has produced our spatio-medical response is this social isolation business and sort of a deaggregation of all kinds of economic, intellectual activities, which you are talking about, the losses that we are experiencing in terms of secondary levels of communications technologies. But, let me put it this way. How does social distancing impact wetness thinking?
I mean, that's let me step back, if you'll allow me to step back a
Please.
little. Actually, I think this is a wonderful time to reflect on what you're asking us to reflect on within a certain context, and the context that I would like to sort of lay out here is that there are two ways of seeing this, sort of crisis that we are in. One is that it is a problem to overcome. I mean, and that is, in some sense, I see it very much in parallel with a flood. just to draw to make
Perfect, beautiful,
my
yes,
connection.
yeah.
And so flood requires human agency to resolve, and so you either build your levees or you change the system, or you do all kinds of things to resolve the flood. And that is what we are facing over here. I mean, with coronavirus, you're trying to curb it, you're trying to resolve it, you're finding a solution to it. In terms of
You're
treatment.
building 6 feet wide levees, basically.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you're constructing your levees.
You're building your
Exactly.
membranes. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Precisely, actually. So 6 feet wide levees all around. I mean, and what a fantastic image, actually, of, it's not build it yourself levee, but it is almost, suited to oneself, everybody walking around with their own levees.
Yeah. I can see the levees all around everyone. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if you look at it, if you sort of, this other side, and that is where the field of wetness calls us toward. And that is that we are not looking at flood only, while I understand that we need to in the short term. In the long term, we look at the need to hold the wetness as opposed to allowing for flows to continue to flood. So if we had to hold everywhere, we would not see water rise at all in so-called flows. So, and this is, to some extent, I think we've spoken about this before, that if I increase forestation, if I increase the reservoirs, up in the mountains, I do not get as much of an impact downstream, and that kind of approach requires not so much it cannot be said to be a resolution of flood as much as it is a change of paradigm from flowing to holding. Now, I'm looking at the virus in a similar manner. And I think the equivalence would be that there should be an approach now to increasing our immunity, and in the long term, and not so much in fighting the problem of the virus. And so that kind of a question, I'm not an authority actually and able to answer it, but I would love to see that parallel come up, in this thing. So you have the problem-solving approach, the flood equivalent and the virus equivalent of a solution. And then you have the wetness equivalent or the holding equivalent. And then, and so what is that? I would love to hear more from people who are willing to sort of push that boundary toward immunity,
Yeah, I think so. What you're talking about, tends, I think, in the direction of what they are talking about in terms of herd immunity. But I dislike the word immunity there. I think, you probably would agree. Mm-hmm. It's not like we become immune. It's rather
kind of resilience. You have to build something else.
Yeah, become resilient and become inoculated, not inoculated, but sort of as a genus become, because it is true, we have these biogenuses, floating everywhere all the time. Basically, you and I are a billion microbes anyway. And so it's a matter of learning to live in better accommodation with that sense of being, right? It's developing trans-species accommodations rather than herd immunity, I suppose. Is that kind of what you're driving at?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Thank you for that, because I really think it's not about defensive barriers. It's about being open. And so, yes, absolutely. It's that sense of accommodation, and where you are, which is really, I think, what we talk about in wetness. It is more about accommodating wetness rather than sort of containing it somewhere.
Abdul Malik Simone, he's a fantastic urban theorist. And he talks about many things, but one of the things that he talks about is, trying to, let me describe to you this, he's trying to discover what he says, quote, incipient formations of new cities and urban regions in the intricate relational meshes of how things get done. a city, a region that is more inclusive, which maximizes the resourcefulness of the inhabitants, that suggests new ways for institutions to concretely connect with their constituents. So basically, he looks at, Jakarta mostly, but he's worked in Delhi and Mumbai also with the Hyderabad Urban Lab, and I know in Northern Africa and Chicago. And he's talking about a untheorized and undescribed way of inhabiting urban space in what we would call accommodating ways of living in the city, which I think you both like me would immediately feel a certain recognition with. It's like moving on the Indian trains, na? Second class in the old days we used to travel.
Yeah.
There's a certain accommodation, and it's a sort of a spatial practice, a social spatial practice, which is well beyond, certainly well beyond our public versus private kind of divisions over here in the West, but even beyond sort of simple hybridizations like sidewalks. It talks about a certain society, and I think that is resonant with the kind of thinking that you are describing, which is, go ahead.
I was just thinking, I'm glad the way you described his work, because people would very quickly take it into the formal and the informal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a very different, you get into another kind of polarity, another kind of, levy in between that.
Right.
What you said, accommodation, is something which Dilip and I have been talking a lot about recently, as to the starting point, which begins with separation, with the line you separate. Like architecture has to begin with separation, the inside, outside, the way we look at it, versus what we were, instead of accommodation, we were using the word negotiation.
Yeah, I see. Negotiation.
And negotiation, not in terms of arbitration, but negotiating your way all the time. You're sort of, accommodating and negotiating would sort of be complementary terms in that sense.
Yes. Give me an example of how you are, or would like to see negotiation as the modality of social interaction in the time of coronavirus. How should we be doing it versus our masks and 6 feet?
It's hard to say in the conditions we are in right now, actually, to operate in this manner, and that is why this is something that we have to sort of set up in the longer term. But this sort of relates to the beginning, to our conversation at the start. When we spoke about how we communicate, and that we communicate to the corner of our eye, and we communicate with our legs, and we communicate. I mean, to me, this is all part of that accommodating world. That the computer does not allow. So the most we can do in a situation like this, the most we can do, and I was telling Anu this, that it'll teach a studio in the fall. I said, why don't we have, instead of working through this medium, why don't we have students, come home one at a time, maybe, and at a distance, I mean, we are, there is more of a, I mean, we allow, something beyond the sort of computer world, so it is, I mean, I don't want to just simply cut off to something computer, but I would say that the first thing that comes in the way, I would think, is this medium that we are operating through, and we have to find ways around it to sort of at least begin. And I don't want to suggest actually that's the normal, but I want to suggest actually that it will allow for the material realm to begin to, or let's say, to keep expressing itself, and that we have to maintain that, that interaction. So it's not about going back to our previous interactions, but perhaps breaking them down,
But Dilip, I mean, I'm purely sympathetic to that, and thank you for that, because I'm struggling with, I have to announce my studio also for fall, and they are like, tell us, and we'll just do it over Zoom, don't worry. And I'm like, I want to reconceptualize it a little bit in view of this. So thank you let's have a little conversation about that. Going around Zoom, one can read your strategy as a kind of resilience in the sense that we will get through this in the best possible way. But let's go back to what you were saying earlier. How do we develop an accommodative inoculation and how do we sort of learn to live with it and sort of take in Zoom, make it part of our, not wholesale, but how do we learn to sort of inoculate ourselves with Zoom and move forward? What's, rather than go around it. Going around it seems to suggest, once again, I'm going to put on my mask and try and go this way.
I can tell you one thing. I mean, I don't want to, I don't know if I can answer your question directly in that manner, but I guess what I'm doing at this moment is using this time in my interaction with students, and others, to reflect on the possibility actually of not returning to a situation of the past, but of laying a ground for a new kind of future. Now, having said that, of course, it seems more than I'm really seeing materialize in some sense, but I'm hoping.
Yeah.
But one of the questions that comes up, I mean, and this is with regard to Abu Malik, what you just mentioned of his work and his thing, is that this is a great time. It's a great time for us to rethink habitation. Our mode of habitation. That we have accepted, for example, the urban urbanity, and and its separation from the rural. So what Anu was just saying, that act of separation, that the urban comes with, is problematic to begin with, So this may be a good time to start reflecting on these binaries, not to invert them, but to ask the question: is there another mode? So we have asked this question of going beyond land, water with wetness.
Right.
The urban-rural divide requires a similar move beyond, and a starting point that will be open to accommodation, your term accommodation or our term negotiation. So I think that in this sense, it is not going around, but using this medium at hand, to address more fundamental questions than we know, I would say, that this medium can accommodate. So, so I mean, this is something that we've often struggled with, Vikram, and that is that the computer is intrinsically, I would say, Cartesian, in a way that it even if it builds a complexity, the screen is constructed in a coordinate manner, so the imaging of it is always grounded in coordinates. And so, whatever argument is being made for its non-linearity and complexity, I see it with I take it with a pinch of salt, and say, no, there's something odd going on. So I don't mind, in some sense, giving in to the contradiction if we can use this time to reflect actually on a new starting point of habitation that's grounded in something that will allow for negotiation and allow us to be more accommodating of other beings, including viruses, and things like that. That we have, beginning with the urban-rural divide, beginning with the land-water divide, we have made an enemy, and so that sense of getting beyond that structure. That's how I would go beyond this.
So I'm with you. Let's try and speculate. For me, this will be speculation. For you, it might be more already considered. Obviously, it is like, so. Let's do Star Wars, or 2001 is better. Let us imagine the Wetness civilization with a Wetness city. When we're not going to use the word city anymore, right? I mean, it's what the Wetness, have Wetness habitation, and maybe, but even inhabit versus What's the opposite of inhabit?
I think in the broadest sense it would be tread lightly, but it is, the fleeting.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's an obvious. I mean, I'm a quick sidebar. I'm thinking of Arjuna Padura in one of his essays. You remember he said the first act of inhabitation is sleeping, because then you inhabit your body in a certain way. I thought that was a fantastic quotation. No, but we are getting sidetracked here. What I'm saying, let's go with the word inhabit. So how would, does the coronavirus situation and or the Zoom situation open up possibilities or wormholes, if you like, into wetness inhabiting ways of being? Do you see any sort of intuitions here? Do you see any possibilities?
It's interesting because, last semester I was teaching a class with a colleague of mine on printmaking and making landscape. And, before coronavirus hit, it's a very material kind of, you have your press, you have your inks, you have your paper, it's a very material world. And we were quite unsure as to how we will translate it into Zoom and be able to work with our students. And they were also then locked into their home. They had no access to the printers, the sort of the big, letter printers and etching printings. And so there was this whole weight and materiality which seemed like a loss. But what we found was that people improvised and started to look very carefully around their own environment with an eye that you normally don't, and started to find material and things that were printable or could be, brought into printmaking, whether it was your kitchen spices, whether it was, different kinds of inks. So there was a different eye it suddenly cast into the environment, which was not just the house I'm stuck in anymore. And it was quite liberating actually for us to see how students started to use their spaces, their walls.
The car. Wait.
Yeah, even one student ran the car over certain prints to get the pressure of a thing. But also they started to use photography. So let's say, with Zoom, so we were only communicating through Zoom with them. So we were not in their material world, but they had got more material. But they were starting to document their process in great detail of what they were doing. And to some extent, rather than us looking at the product of what they were making, we were able to enter very intimately into these very detailed images of how certain thing was coagulating, the ink spread, what happened. And they got quite detailed about it. And we had a sense that had we not been in this situation, that was something we would have just taken for granted or not even looked at. So the work, what was the work in the end was not just the object of what was the finished product. It was all these worlds. It was the eye they cast around their house. It was the materials. And they also made fantastic things. So in some ways, Zoom gave us, it wasn't a loss in the end. It just gave us a very different kind of conclusion to a class and a different kind of class.
What I'm hearing you say is that it it undid the levy between the studio space and the not studio space.
Absolutely, you're very right. Yeah.
But it also introduced Vikram. It also introduced a kind of more rain-driven spirit than a river-driven spirit. Let's put it like that. In the sense that there was a multiplicity of places that came into play, a multiplicity, from the kitchen to the car, the roadside, to
windows. There were some students did amazing things with on their window. There's one girl who did the set of what we call moonlight prints. You can make prints through, exposing cyanotype, which is what the traditional print used to be. But she would set the alarm at 3 a.m. in the night and put her print in the moonlight and then take it out at 5 o'clock. So even time became a very different thing. They were not only in studio at studio time or just working late. There was a whole. So anyway, this was just. But you just what you said triggered that.
No, and it's not like they couldn't have done this before. It's rather the undoing of the studio space which enables this thing to happen.
Yeah, right.
I would, if I can take that a little further, Vikram, it might be like this. But this is something that we are also working on, and you've got probably glimpses of this. And that is that in place of a surface that you inhabit, in the sense of you occupy, and
You sleep on.
you sleep on. Yes, you sleep on.
Sleep in, maybe.
Yeah, it's that sense of, it comes with in our mind a separation between waters above and waters below, the rain and the groundwater, and that so we take that as our ground of habitation. And I would think that our studios, in the equivalent of the studio space, in some sense, is this. If I had to draw a parallel between that and this, it's on one side. The other side, this multiplicity of places that open up, the undoing, the thing that happens more in a zone between clouds and aquifers, where there's no surface anymore. It's between clouds and aquifers. So if I had to draw a parallel, here with a rain-driven imagination that has to come into play, that might be what we are witnessing actually as this, as the Zoom world, if you will. But
the thing is, maybe witnessing is the wrong operative metaphor there, because of the eye-centric universe, as you said in your wonderful lecture, forces these divisions. And we are maybe not witnessing it, and maybe we are just experiencing it at a sort of
more imminent. It's more inside us, and it's more around us than us looking at.
Right.
But one of the reasons we like using it, actually, is only because we've often been intrigued by the distinction between the void as a space of creation. Where things come into being, as it were, out of nothing. And that sensibility is very much what underlies our civilizational world, if you will. And then on the other hand, you have the fullness of things that are so so filling, if you will, that you have to distinguish. You have to find your way in it, which is more to me like the Indian street, the Maidan, the bazaar. These are places to me that are the starting points of design. So it's not the void, but it's the fullness. And so I find wetness as a starting point, as a metaphor. And you say, there's got to be, we've often struggled with this, and and can there be something other than that? And this thing that speaks to immanence and to non-linearity simultaneously.
Yeah, I like that. Let's just talk about the wet bazaar. I'm just going to call it or the bazaar wetness is maybe what you are talking about. Or the Maidan wetness, right?
Right.
Let's go there, and sort of from an oblique way. Let me first ask, how are things? Are you in touch with the home, and what are you hearing from India in terms of just the impact of all this on, just directly in terms of friends, family, and colleagues, but also are you hearing how the bazaar and Maidan is responding to this situation?
We've given this a lot of thought, I must say, most certainly, actually, because we begin to see in a situation like this, how, a kind of replay of the hygiene mindset that has driven planning, and how much the British tried to, let's say, inoculate us.
Well, they were phobic. Modernism tried to inoculate everything. Yeah. Anyway, but go on. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But inoculate us with parks and with civilizational sensibilities and so on.
Right.
And here we have the Maidan that is still surviving. We still have the bazaar. We still have. They're going nowhere. They are there and they stay there. And I tell you that I find most intriguing. If there is anything that defies eradication, however much you try, it is these kind of grounds. And it goes back to what Anu was saying. You can't just reduce it to the informal. There's got to be a learning from these things. So I'm looking at some of this, while we see this as, tragic from the point of view of this disease, the over contact and this and that inability to control. There's something mysterious about it that cannot be, it sort of defies understanding in this respect. So it's not something that we can sort of draw conclusions from in the sense of it being, worse for the virus or better for the virus. I don't know whether I want to go there. But everything that we are learning tells us that,
But you're just going back to what one is hearing from back there. I feel that we are the hearing has got two completely different channels. One is one's immediate families, or a middle class, upper middle class family, which is doing everything, which is very similar, living very similarly to what we may be doing here. Kind of, controls they can keep, masks they can wear, how they operate. And there is, worry about older parents, and things like that. So, it's pretty much, it's part of the global world, which is, following the instructions. But then, of course, we hear from India all these others. Yeah. We have no access to even imagine what their lives are. People walking thousands of miles to their villages, walking on train tracks, not having the food to eat. I think our imagination, even in our imagination, we cannot imagine the kind of world they are living in right now. We can pay lip service to it. We can feel bad about it. And so for me, when I think of India, I feel it is like no other place. These two things are in such great tension, or such two different worlds. So the rules of one world. So I feel the Maidan and the Bazaar are probably operating very much so with people and places that we have very little access to.
It's a good question, though. It's beyond our imagination, but I would say it's beyond our imagination in the same way as, in a sense, wetness is beyond our imagination, because we are so entrapped or wedded to, or so, soldered to or welded to, a eye-centric Levy described imagination.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, but the power of your work and your way of looking at things is that it points to that other imagination without overtly, claiming to describe it, because it's not easily accessible to the epistemological frameworks that we inhabit, right?
Correct.
So that sets up for me, I think, an interesting. We are jumping between categories, but agar chalo chalta hai, sets up an interesting possibility to not claim to be in their space, in that space, or in the space of those inhabiting, let's say, the Maidan or the Bazaar, but nevertheless point in that direction with some claim. Would you claim or hypothesize, or I'm struggling for words, but I hope I'm getting through. From your perspective, would one say that the sort of accommodation to the virus that you articulated earlier is probably, for lack of better description, happening better in the Maidan and Bazaar communities?
Yeah.
The only reason I would hesitate to say that, and this is something that we've experienced all along in our careers. In that the only time that we can make a case for our position is when there's a disaster. When the dominant paradigm is suffering, with flood. So and then in flood we see actually, it's like what happened in Kerala. With the flooding in Kerala, what happened was that, immediately, you had the fisherman who was rescuing everybody, And the fisherman is somebody who lives, who's outside of the caste system. People were refusing to get into their boats because they were of the lower, they were outside the caste system. I mean, they were like that. So, so it's this, what do you call it, in these moments that one sees these tragedies and, or let's say one sees in these tragedies the other paradigm at work, but here and you've really pointed to one of the most difficult things that we have to deal with, because in that sighting of the other paradigm is also its oppression, and it's and our ignorance of it.
Yeah.
So we look at it actually as a moment to learn more than concluding that this is it's a better situation, because there is an oppression also that comes in, like what Anu's talking about, migrating. People in the Maidan, but the Maidan has become such a marginalized space with the dominant paradigm that we've done everything to eradicate its means of working. And so it is now in this dispersed manner that it is, so you have, when the Maidan is fenced off like they've done in Bombay, you have the streets that become the Maidan. Then, you have so these become places of oppression and liberation simultaneously. So it sort of cautions us to jump to saying that it is better, but I'm glad that you brought this. I mean, that you're pushing this aspect of it, because I think it is very important to just simply draw attention to the sighting of what we normally just simply call informal. Or,
Yes. I mean, I like how you are articulating it. It sort of reminds me of Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which is that you cannot just get access to that otherness, which is the bazaar or the Maidan, through the lens of normativity, because accessing it through normativity is indelibly marked by the asymmetries of capital and exploitation. And therefore, the other that's available through that is marked by that asymmetry in a way that you cannot separate it, other than through a lens of romanticization, which therefore is already hierarchical and binary. I mean, that would be my shorthand. I'm not sure.
Which is very relevant to even the most immediate situation on hand, with all the protests with the Black Lives Matter. It's a very similar kind of asymmetry that we are talking about.
Yes. Please go on, Anuradha. And what do you mean by that? I mean,
I think that it's not about understanding the other, and having access to that, or just being able to rationalize or through logic be able to come to the other side. What I'm saying is that it is a very similar lack of access that brings humility that you can never quite know.
I think the way I would put it, Anu, is that it is that what I'm finding is where I find the conversation going today. I mean, in this thing is very much an issue of identity, and a recognition of rights. And while I see that as necessary, again, it is like the flood. It's like the flood example. You're dealing with the flood paradigm. But there's this other side where one recognizes actually that that what doesn't enter the conversation is difference. That it is who is claiming the ground of difference, on whose difference is, or let's say terms of difference is the conversation happening. And the terms of difference is very often structured, and in this case, structured by the Constitution, structured by this thing, very much actually in the hands of the white, on one side. And so that situation actually, how do you allow for the terms of difference of what has been constituted as the other to come into the picture? And this is exactly what we find with water and land. It's always in the terms of land that flood is controlled.
Right.
And so water never has a say, and that is why we find wetness to be the release actually of water onto its own ground. So we must find an equivalent. We must find an equivalent then for the situation of color.
Yes.
and
Yes.
what would those terms, of the other then not the other? Which is also a nice point that you brought up with the uncertainty principle, which is
Yeah.
why we look at uncertainty, Vikram. We also see possibility, it's uncertainty coupled with possibility. And sometimes we even say there's no such thing as uncertainty because there's no such thing as certainty. There's
Yeah.
only possibility.
Yeah.
So we argue against engineers who talk about probability understanding, which is of course a kind of flexing of certainty, of the uncertainty principle, probability. And we say that no, we don't believe in probability, we believe in possibility, and we design for possibility. Now that is easier said than done, but
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is
But I like it. I mean, probability and possibility are perhaps a sleight of hand cousins of each other, variously negotiating and accommodating with each other.
But never becoming it's the same, but also opposing each other.
yeah, but
Yes, they have to, but at the same time, they're best friends. As a lovers quarrel, it's like Robert Frost put it, right? I mean, and if an epitaph was to be my story, I would have written of me on my tomb, I had a lovers quarrel with the world. So they're like probability and possibility, I see as quarreling lovers versus certainty.
You're right. I mean, but to some extent, certainty never allowed for possibility, but probability does. In a sense that it's like uncertainty coming off its pedestal,
Yes,
or
yes.
certainty coming off its pedestal.
Yeah.
Probability, and its argument with possibility is something that we are fascinated by. Particularly.
I mean, in that sense, wetness is also a placeholder term, I would argue. It's a placeholder term because it seeks to deconstruct the opposition between land and water. But it must necessarily still recognize that it comes or still continues to inhabit the epistemic framing of land-controlled worldviews. So it is placed up there like probability and possibility, next to each other. All sort of bracketed terms, indicating and pointing at something rather than actually marking them. Yes.
Yeah, which is why we like to say, actually, I mean, that if one, I mean, and this may be elevating one of the lovers, but that we see possibility underlying probability, and so we see wetness underlying the land water. So, like you say, it's always there, but it underlies. So we see the informal, what people just what you call it, visualize as the informal, as underpinning the thing, and so it's that underpinning that allows it to survive and to always be there, and which is what we should be pleased about. I mean, and we are pleased about it, and so our whole world is about. I mean, our whole life's work is about uncovering that. But like you say, it is a placeholder for a much.
No. I respect that. It's not just a placeholder. It's an indicator, but which I would say cannot be uncovered, because if you uncover it, it sort of moves into the realm of the epistemic hegemonic, or rather, it has to be indicated as the what is your word, underpinning. Or the other word for is subtending. It subtends the world. I mean, I would connect it to Derrida's grammatology as the sort of the text as that which underpins the possibility of language, which is to make precise meaning, whereas grammatology or the sort of function of language is error making and miscoding. What he calls miscoding. It's not the opposite of coding, but it is the substrate which sort of lies behind and beyond us, but which we can only access via our world of meaning making, which is language making, but a mode of meaning making which is apprehensive of and in a sense subservient to and recognizes that larger underpinning is different from one which believes I am in control. So that's good. So, but can you sense the possibility of the bazaar and the maidan in your house or not?
I think we so inhabit it that we carry it with us, but yes.
There are good days and there are bad days.
There are good days and there are bad days. Yeah, I would agree with you on that. And I think let's sort of, towards the end here, try and connect that to the Black Lives Matter protests that we are seeing around us, I presume, in Philadelphia as well. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, in this othering between Black lives and white lives, I mean, how do you feel about brown lives? What is your feeling about your own subjective identities in this situation? Do you?
Yeah. No, I think that's a very good. It's a very good question, and in fact, we draw the parallel between racism and colonialism, and I feel that there is a certain inadequacy in that. But if I had to just play out the parallel in it, I think that there is a lot that is demanded in terms of changing the system. I mean, to me, what it calls for is nothing less than changing the Constitution. And reworking the Constitution with a different population in play. And I think I would say the same thing with the colonial state like India. And they are operating still in a very colonial environment. They're operating with the same language of colonialism, and I would think.
Are you talking about the Central Vista project?
Case in point, actually, and even the shooting down of it by the Supreme Court.
The Supreme Court shot it down?
Not shot it down. No. They didn't shoot down the project. No, but someone brought it to the Supreme Court. Someone raised.
They dismissed it, right? Yeah. They just said,
yeah. Correct. They dismissed the objection. Now that is colonial squared.
Yeah, colonialism 2.0 or 2 squared. Yeah.
So yes, I would think that there is a lot actually between the black and the brown that requires, and here again, Vikram, I would go even further, and this is really about land and water. This is about urban and rural. This is about, so there seems to be the methodology of our world that is driven by the act of separation. And we need to rethink this fundamentally. And this is where we as designers, I believe, can set the tone for challenging this separation. So we want to question why architecture separates inside and outside. And that is why the hut has never qualified, because a hut is made by people who never separate inside outside. So they talk about architecture and landscape, or talk about, this versus that. There is this sense of practices that are continuously emerging and working a situation of, let's say, for lack of a better term, wetness. And so I think that I would expand the black and the brown to our animals, to our to water, there's a whole host of things that come out of separation that we need to revise. I wouldn't say revise, but we need to rework from the ground up in an alternate paradigm. And this is where I feel that, and this is just my bias, India has so much to provide the world, with this alternate paradigm. And that is why we are so focused on the monsoon world and India. I think because India is intrinsically, I would think, this realm of wetness and has the potential to overcome this language of separation with negotiation that we continuously see in the Maidan that refuses to die, that refuses to die. So there must be something there that India can give the world today, and so we are after that sort of grounding and another kind of ground, I would say.
Yeah, I know, I would agree. I mean, that's an interesting proposition because just now we are witnessing, this sort of levee building around blackness, so to speak, in this country. Even if it's in an affirmative way to sort of point out the constitutive violence that has done and therefore to try and undo it. But at the same time, in the long run, it has to work towards we have to all work towards here and internationally and towards not a singularity of human beings and singular subjects, but towards a kind of a wetness reading of humanness or transspeciesness. I wonder what the wetness equivalent term for that is, or wet post-humanism or something.
You get the point. Yes, I think you make
bizarreness of humanism, right. Which is both to be known and learned and exchanged across civilizations. But anyway, it's been a fantastic conversation, Anu, Dilip. Always so nice to talk to you. I'm glad to see that you look healthy and look like you are most days doing well enough, ups and downs. We all have this. It's a challenging time. Thank you so very much for taking time and being on this show with me.
Yeah, our pleasure, Vikram. Wonderful seeing you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Architecture Talk. This is your producer, Amelia Jarvinen. We hope you enjoyed the conversation, and if you did, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Spotify. We would also love to hear from you if you have any suggestions on new topics or guests. You can always reach out to us on our website, Facebook, or Instagram. Thanks again, and until next time, this is Architecture Talk.